Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show that always strives to bring you insight and interesting things to say about the issues on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, and the wide world. And with me, as always, my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation himself, John Jurisic. And John, again, another week with so many things to talk about.
Right? And one of the most impactful, as we've, for the last 6 months, you and I have been chatting about what's going to happen when the COVID pandemic becomes an endemic, it becomes a more natural part of our lives. And we can see ourselves in that. And one of the most direct impacts of that is how it impacts travel, right? And the feds have just made a big decision. The federal government has just made a big decision yesterday. Unvaccinated people will now be able to fly within the country, and there will be no further delays for COVID testing when you're leaving for holidays outside of the country. There's clearly still Omicron in the air. I mean, I know for a fact that there are more folks that have caught COVID in my circle of friends in the last 3 months than have in 2 years. It's clearly around, but we are all trying to come back to normal and all trying to react and have this disease as a, unfortunately, normal part of our lives. So I really hope that this continues that way.
I think they have found that people who've had their vaccinations can still carry it and still get sick from Omicron. The real issue here is if you're willing to travel and you haven't been vaccinated, be prepared that you could get Omicron and get much sicker than somebody who's had their vaccinations. I think that's pretty well the proof in the pudding, but I think we've taken the right step. It looks like Omicron it's fading back. It's time to let people travel. If it gets serious again, I'm sure governments at every level will revisit it, but I think it's the right move. And we've got other big news going on, John. It's the forest protesters. The old growth people are back. Save old growth protesters with blockades. And they've been doing it on the mainland. They were back on the island. They started off on the Pat Bay Highway, and they blocked off traffic going both ways, demanding that all old growth forest logging stop, period. and there's negotiations going on right now. A lot of it's with First Nations bands because a lot of the old growth sits on First Nations territories. There's First Nations logging companies involved, First Nations mills involved, and it's being kind of ignored. So right now, there's concerns about the methodology behind this. It could all backfire, John. We could have a situation where somebody on this protest line is going to get hurt because people are getting angry. And we saw examples of that on the Pat Bay Highway of people. There were no policemen there, people taking action into their own hands because of their frustration. Let's take a look at what happened.
This is a non-violent, peaceful protest. The police are on the way.
This is a non-violent protest too. Holy fuck.
Robin, a fellow was taken to hospital. Guy's broken his pelvis. I mean, he could be not working for a while. This is serious stuff, eh? And he broke it when he fell off the ladder. They cut the cable to the ladder and he tumbled to the ground. And there's all kinds of video of this on Twitter. This type of protest is dangerous. It's causing immeasurable tension and anger. And as it happens, this is just one of the topics that we're now going to discuss with our special guest today.
That's right. Kevin Falcon is going to be joining us, the newly minted leader of the BC Liberal Party and, of course, leader of the opposition at the legislature. And he's just back from their big convention in Penticton. He's talking about how he'd handle things in British Columbia in 2 years' time if he is fortunate enough to win the next provincial election, which is, I guess, something we'll see down the road, but it's going to be very interesting to see what he has to offer. He's already talking about a name change for the party. Apparently, it won't be the British Columbia Party because Elections BC doesn't like that, but it's going to be something. And it's been interesting to hear what Kevin Falcon has to say on a variety of topics. So let's zoom him in.
Well, now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room for the first time, just back from the party's convention, is the new leader of the BC Liberal Party, Kevin Falcon. Welcome to the Rumble Room, Kevin.
Thanks for having me, John and Robin.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for setting aside time to dig a little deeper into some of the issues, some of the critical issues that are going on in this province. Right off the top, okay, how can we not start with this? Old growth protesters blocked the Pat Bay Highway on Vancouver Island and are now promising more disruptions on bridges and highways until all of the old growth logging ends, period. They call this peaceful, non-violent protest, and getting arrested doesn't seem to be an issue. 80% of the old growth is protected at the moment. If you were Premier, Kevin, how would you deal with their demands and their actions?
Yeah. So look, I actually, this irritates me greatly because first of all, it's important to point out, I have always been a very strong defender of individuals' right to protest government policy. It's just integral to our democratic system. And, as Voltaire, I believe it was, once said, I may not agree with what you say, but I will die defending your right to say it. So I'm all there with the right to protest. However, that's coupled with the right to obey the law. And I am increasingly concerned that there is just a flagrant disrespect for the law that has grown under this NDP government, frankly, because they set the tone. And the tone that they have set is a combination of catch and release, whereby these folks get arrested and they're out the same day often. And it's also a tone set by an NDP government that often will have people like Minister Cullen literally delivering food to illegal blockades up in Houston, British Columbia, to suck up to these illegal protesters. And frankly, it is wrong. And when you're a premier of the province, you are responsible for ensuring rule of law. And that means the laws apply equally to everybody. And if people think they can just go out and disrupt traffic and cause people to miss important medical appointments, important business meetings, cause food to rot, whatever the case may be, they ought to be held accountable, strongly accountable. And I can tell you under Kevin Falcon, it will be a very different world for those that think they can just flagrantly break the law like that. First of all, I will back the police up 100%. That's important because the police need to know that the premier and the government are right behind them on moving quickly and effectively against these kind of folks. Secondly, I think what we should do is, frankly, have them spend a lot of time. I'm suggesting we start out with 50 hours of community work, cleaning up graffiti and picking up garbage in some of the areas like the downtown east side or downtown Nanaimo, Victoria, whatever the case may be. And then those will escalate. If they want to come back and keep breaking the law, that's fine. A little jail time could be the next order of business for them. Because I can tell you, look, I've been through this before. When I was trying to build the Sea to Sky Highway, we had some protesters that were there. I was fine with that. They had a right to protest. But once the decision was made and it was time to get on with the construction and building of that project, and they continued to stay there, we did the right thing and we went in and we arrested them. And we also sued many of them personally. To make sure that the contractors were able to get back the dollars that they were, it was costing them. So I will be very, very firm about both protecting their right to protest and making sure the law gets enforced.
So thank you, Kevin. Let's go on the flip side of this issue, okay? So when you were deputy premier, just a few years ago, the Clark government was invested in creating policy tools for First Nations economic development. This included forestry. Many of the nations rely on old growth logging for their economic development initiatives. So would you then address old growth forest issues differently as premier?
Well, I think this, goes really to the heart of the challenge here. Remember, for decades and decades, we as governments all the way back to WAC Bennett, have been harvesting trees across this province without paying much attention to First Nations interests at all, frankly. And so what we tried to do is say, no, we want to make sure that First Nations are going to be full participants in deciding what land uses should take place on lands that they have traditionally inhabited. And so when you turn over that authority to them, as we have, to make them partners in the economic system, imagine what it must be like when you finally provide them the tools to allow them to make decisions in the best interests of their own members, only to find a group of people, often that aren't even from British Columbia, come in and try to speak on their behalf and say, oh, no, this isn't good for First Nations. We don't want them to be doing this. Well, frankly, that's pretty imperialistic, if you will, to just assume that they can speak for First Nations. No, I think First Nations ought to be making the decisions about what is in the best interests of their people and their territories. And I think that this kind of an approach goes right against it.
These are really important answers to the questions that are on people's minds. And I think, well, right now, everybody's upset about the blockades and the threat that they're going to be every day. And I think what people are really concerned about is somebody's going to get seriously hurt or even killed. There's already been some confrontation. But, on a bigger scale, when we look at 2 years' time, we look at what the biggest issue may be in the province right now, I would suggest it's got to be the BC doctor shortage.
But the problem is he has no credible plan to actually address the crumbling, teetering healthcare system. We have almost 1 million British Columbians without access to a family doctor. The longest walk-in clinic wait times in the country right here in British Columbia. We've got emergency rooms all across right across this great province. They're shutting down on almost a daily basis and forcing patients to drive for hours to receive the emergency care they need.
It's a terrible problem. On the South Island, it's 1 out of 4 don't have a family doctor. Provincially, it's almost 1 out of 5. That's like almost 1 million British Columbians don't have a family doctor. You were a health minister, I believe, back in 2010?
Yes.
And there was a GP for Me program. It helped actually reduce the problem at the time. But it wasn't a fix. It didn't really turn the tide in the longer term. We still have this mess. This is an evolving problem that's been going on for quite some time. And so, what do we do at this point? What's going to really solve this problem? We need some immediate help, I would suggest. Do you think it's time for foreign doctors?
So this is a big subject. So I'm going to take a moment on this because I think it's so very important. I have to tell you, I was a Minister of Health for 2 years, not a long time, but in those 2 years, I learned a lot about the healthcare system, and certainly, sitting around the cabinet table for 12 years, gave me a little bit of insight into the healthcare system in BC. I can tell you what I'm seeing happening today is deeply concerning. This goes beyond politics. This is like a system imploding upon itself. And the Premier is correct when he describes it as crumbling, teetering. It's all of that. It's worse. So let's back up for a second. When I was Minister of Health, we brought in the GP for Me. The idea being that we need to support family physicians so that they want to practice as family physicians, provide them the kind of support that will allow dietitians, nurse practitioners, nurses to work within their offices so that they get the supports, mental health, psychiatric help, so that they get the supports they need to run and do what they do best, which is act as a GP and look after folks. And we called it the divisions of family practice. And that was a really important project, which is still in place, but I would argue has not been focused on the way it should have been. I launched it. And unfortunately, I left government, as you know, and announced my retirement in 2012. The NDP are now in their second term of government. And in their second term of government, they have added exactly 0 new training spaces for doctors. None. And as I pointed out to the Premier and the Minister of Health and the legislature, are you kidding me? In your second year in government, you haven't added a single space? This crisis is not something that just happened. It's something that you can look at the age demographics of physicians, and you can see that you've got a good chunk of them that are 70 years, I think it's over 400, that are 70 years of age or over. And so any government that actually thinks about government and thinks about governing is going to try and get ahead of that issue. And they haven't done that. And that's why we're facing some of the huge challenges we're facing today.
But are we also facing it because a lot of those people that are graduating from medical school don't want to be GPs because it's expensive to run your office? There's all this paperwork you're not getting paid for. It's better for you and better for your family to become a hospitalist or go back and do a specialty. And a lot of people aren't doing family medicine, and people are not even wanting to go and be locums. I mean, there's a locum shortage in the province. There's overall this terrible problem. You could probably double the number of doctor seats now at UBC. I don't know how that's going to help people like John and I, who are both in our 60s. A lot of our friends are in their 70s, and they need a doctor now. They need help now. We don't need help in 8 years' time when there's more doctors in the system. What are we going to do about the immediate problem?
Sir, so there's a whole bunch of aspects to this problem. That's why I said it's a deep subject. But let me just specifically address, Robin, what you just said. I've had physicians come to me and say, Kevin, I'm leaving. I was talking to a young South Asian woman, actually. It was a doctor. She was so young. I was amazed that she was a doctor. I'm like, wow, bright person. And she said she's leaving family practice, going into emergency med, because she said the paperwork involved and the cost that government keeps imposing. So, you think of all the things they do, where the 5 paid sick days for all employees, for example. You think about all the red tape and rules. You think about the new taxes they brought in. As she pointed out to me, when she pulls money out of the business, she's now paying, 53.5% tax rate, the highest, almost the highest in North America rate here in BC under the NDP. Then she looks at the housing and says, well, now we've got the most expensive housing. So if I want to try and buy a home, it's a struggle. And this is a doctor, for God's sakes. Imagine how a firefighter and a teacher feel when they're trying to challenge these same problems. And so we have to understand the economic model doesn't work. The NDP don't understand that because they don't understand economics. None of them come from a business background. So they can't look at it and understand what the problem is because they've never been there. I can look at it and I can see what the problem is like within seconds. And I've spoken to lots of doctors. I know exactly the challenge they're facing. What we have to do is change the model immediately so that it's a model that works for them, so that they want to practice medicine. And it's not just about money. I want to be clear about this. You talk to physicians, it's also about lifestyle. They don't want to have to spend their entire evenings doing paperwork that the NDP have keep imposing. As one Victoria physician told me, she said that her paperwork has gone up 80% in the last 6 years under the NDP government. Well, what the heck are they doing? This is time out of their lives and their families that they aren't prepared to give up anymore. So there's lots of things we can do. Final point I'll make is this: foreign trained doctors. We have to stop the situation where highly skilled foreign trained doctors, many Canadian, by the way, that just happen to have had their education overseas, cannot get into our system because of the lack of residency training spaces or the bureaucracy and red tape that the College of Physicians and Surgeons puts in place. I am going to change that. We are going to make sure that doctors that want to practice here, that have the right skill sets, get the right to practice here. I'm not going to chase them away to other jurisdictions. We need them here. And I'm going to make sure that happens. You watch how quickly I can move when I want to get something to happen. So
John and I think each have one more question for you, and we'll be wrapping this baby up. Of course, there's a million questions we could ask. We appreciate you giving us all this time. My final question is about the Royal BC Museum. And, there's a lot of conjecture out there that they're going to pull a Site C dam, this being the NDP. They'll rip down the museum. Even if you are happy to win in 2024, there you'll be facing this big hole in the ground and have no choice but to replace the BC Museum in much the same scenario as the Site C dam had gone ahead so far that John Horgan, when he was elected, said he couldn't reverse it. Now, that may or may not be true, but that's certainly what he said. So are you concerned about this, that the NDP is so willful in this that they're going to rip down the museum and leave you holding the bag?
Yeah, so look, I think everything about this capital project that they're plunging ahead with makes absolutely no sense. I really want your listeners to understand just how bad a decision this really is. So here's what we know, and I asked a lot of questions to the Premier during the Premier's estimates. He took about 10 minutes before he'd answer even straightforward basic questions because he had to talk to a whole group of, 10, 12 staffers before he could give an answer. And his answers were awful. So here's what we know so far. They are going to close this unbelievably fine, beautiful museum that sees some 900,000 people a year during normal times, and receives a 94% approval rating from those guests that come visit it, is perfectly fine condition. They make it sound like it's about to tumble and to collapse, because of its seismic challenges tomorrow. That's not the case. The seismic rating is actually overall good, which I pointed out to the Premier. Better than most of the schools that require seismic upgrading, by the way, that our children go to every day. But nevertheless, their decision is they're going to shut it down on September the 6th. That is going to mean we will have years without a huge economic generator in the heart of Victoria, which generates about 1.6 billion a year in positive effects for the tourism sector writ large. It employs 500 plus people that will no longer have a job. And this, in spite of the fact they haven't even got drawings done for this building. There's no need to close it on September 6th. It makes absolutely no sense. And then to make it worse, because a lot of people keep talking about the museum costing $789 million. No, that's what they're saying the cost of just the new building there will cost. What they forget is they're already underway with a ridiculous thing called a collections building in John Horgan's riding of Colwood. And that is a building that is supposed to house all the artifacts and the things that are in the basement of the existing museum that are going to move over to this new collections building. That collections building hasn't even started construction. It's already 1 year behind its schedule that they originally set out, and the budget's gone from 177 million to 225 million. That's almost $250 million. It will be over $250 million by the time these jokers get going, just to store things. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really weird. So I say to the Premier, why would you close it down September 6th? There's no good reason to. You could keep it going for years while you go through all the design drawings and build that collections building. And then when that's finished, you could then move all those goods into the new building. But in the meantime, where are you going to move all the artifacts, Premier? Well, what I got out of them was they're going to spend another $11.25 million. That'll be a low number too, I can promise you, to temporarily store all these artifacts to another building. So they're going to take them out of the museum. They're going to temporarily store them in this other building. Well, this collections building, which is already over budget, is being built. Then they're going to move it into this collections building. Then they're going to tear down the existing building. Now, when they tear down the existing building, understand that just a couple of years ago, this NDP government just closed on a deal to purchase the IMAX equipment that's in that building for $4.25 million. And that's going to all be torn down with the rest of the museum. I mean, this is madness. And so you have to ask yourself, why would they do this? Because we know that at over $1 billion, because it'll be way more than 789 by the time it's done. We don't even know where they came up with that number, by the way, because they redacted a third of the pages in their 100-page business case. All the information that would be valuable for an executive to know whether this makes sense was all blacked out. It will be well more than $1 billion. That it would be the most expensive museum in North America, literally. And I'm telling you, at a time when we can't, in Victoria even, like you pointed out, where 1 in 4 can't get access to a family physician, for goodness sakes, they think it's appropriate to go and spend over $1 billion on a building that nobody asked for and nobody wants.
Thank you, Kevin. So my final question, just a little small one, around the cost of living in BC, akin to asking you, what is the meaning of life? Is there really anything that a provincial premier can do about gas prices, for example, which are the highest in North America? Our housing, I've done a ton of housing advocacy on the peninsula here on Vancouver Island around how do we create more affordable workforce housing. Our housing costs are some of the highest on the planet. What can be done about this?
Sure. And so it's a great question because it's important to understand there are solutions. But it starts with having people that understand the economy, that understand markets, that understand how the system works. And here we've got a premier, and frankly, most of his entire front bench are professional politicians. That's all they've ever done their entire lives. They've never worked in the private sector. And as someone that's been in the private sector, we were just talking about the stupid museum they want to build. I said to the premier during estimates, if you ever brought a half-baked proposal like that before any corporate board, you would have been fired in minutes. And I can't wait till, frankly, British Columbians get the chance to fire him about 2 years from now. Because what you're talking about is really important. The NDP ran in 2 election campaigns on a platform of affordability. Okay, let's do a check-in. Housing. highest housing prices in North America under the NDP, third highest in the planet. I've said from the beginning when I launched my campaign that to deal with the housing crisis, the first thing we have to do is flood the zone with all kinds of new supply. We need more market rental. We need more affordable rental. We need more condos, townhomes, single family homes, depending on the area, whatever. We need more of everything. And this government thought that the answer was, one, blame it on Chinese foreign buyers. Wrong. It wasn't just Chinese foreign buyers. We can see the stats because we collect them all now. It's less than 4% of the buyers are foreigners. Number two, they said, let's just layer on a whole bunch of taxes and that's going to get us, the right result. And so here we are. They've layered on a whole blizzard of new taxes back in the first budget that they ever came out with. And here we are 6 years later, and we've got the highest housing prices in North America, a total policy faceplant. Okay. And only now is David Eby, the totally incompetent housing minister, now acknowledging, well, gee, maybe supply might be part of the problem here. Well, no kidding. I mean, this is something that anybody that knows anything about the industry could have told you. And the NDP will often criticize me and say, oh, he, worked for a company, Anthem Capital, and part of what they do is, they're developers and, they're terrible. Well, frankly, I think it'd be nice to have a premier that knows a thing or two about the housing market, because I can tell you they don't. And they've gotten us the worst possible results. And what I will do is make sure we get really good results. And I've been very clear about this. I will bring in legislation that frankly forces local government to have to bring in timely approvals on new housing, because I'm not going to sit around and watch housing take 5-6 years to get through the approval and permitting process in BC. Not going to happen under Kevin Falcon. We're going to make sure we get lots of new supply. Then I'm going to look at all of the costs that the NDP and government at all levels, frankly, have imposed on housing. You've got the property transfer tax, the GST, the PST. You've got community amenity contributions, development cost charges. You've got public art charges, and the list goes on and on and on. And that represents about 25% of the cost of every new home, condo, or townhome built today. It's all government taxes. So we've got to look at all those costs through the eyes of a first-time buyer, because I can tell you this, I am going to make sure that first-time buyers, especially young British Columbians, have a credible path to home ownership. Not messing around with this. I'm going to make sure that the dream of home ownership isn't extinguished by the current band of incompetence that we have in Victoria right now that are making it impossible for young people to ever believe they can own a home in British Columbia. That's not the future I want for my children or yours or your grandchildren.
Great to have Kevin Falcon in the Rumble Room. I suspect we'll have him again. And just so that everyone who's listening understands, we are equally interested in speaking to the Premier John Horgan, equally interested to speaking to the NDP side of the story on any of the issues that we are talking about. So John's an Island MLA. I'm sure he has a lot to say on these topics we just covered with the Liberal leader. So John Horgan, how about it, Mr. Premier? Come on board. Come on board. We'll give you equal time. But for now, let's quickly change topics and swing our attention over to an absolute tragedy of events, over to the Ukraine.
Yeah, the Ukrainian war continues, the Russian invasion unabated, and it sounds like it's getting very, very gnarly. Lots of people in that Donbass region on both sides are dying. A lot of soldiers are meeting a tough fate, and it's awful to see this. In the meantime, we have a huge wave of refugees leaving the country. Many of them are coming to Canada, some to Vancouver Island and Greater Victoria. And Devin Goldie, who is the president of the Victoria Ukrainian Cultural Center, is going to be joining us. And we keep promising that she's going to come, but because of the length of our interview with Kevin Falcon, we wanted to give the Ukrainian issue a bigger berth. So it's going to be our lead story next week. And we promise that we'll have Devin Goldie on, and we're going to talk more about helping the refugees as they arrive here. And there are other people that are doing their bit, including 4 individuals from Langford who are heading overseas. It's momentarily heading over as a humanitarian trade mission to Ukraine, and that includes Langford Mayor Stu Young, and here's what he has to say about it.
Yeah, well, we were at a fundraiser for Ukraine that Shannon Russell was actually putting on at the Legion. And of course, the ex-fire chief Bob Beckett was there sitting at our table with some Ukrainian families as well. And so we got to talking, and then he said, hey, we need to start doing some more stuff, and we just, one thing led to another. And so really what we're trying to do is support Ukraine, the families when they move here, but also to help feed the people in Ukraine.
So you're not telling us the name, but you do have a city picked out? There's
Yes,
a municipality
there
you're meeting with?
Yeah, there is cities where Global Medic is, and that we're going there on humanitarian mission to make sure that we can do something to help feed the 25,000 refugees that are already, women and children that are already in the cities, and they're having a hard time dealing with the influx going into some of these cities inside Ukraine.
So lots more to hear about the Ukraine upcoming. This is an ongoing story. I wish it wasn't. I wish that Putin would back off or the Ukrainians could kick them out. It's just terrible to see this going on in this day and age. And we'll keep you informed as closely as we can, because so many people have connections with Ukraine, either of descent or people that they know that are of Ukrainian descent that live in this country. But for now, John, we're almost out of time on the show. Again, could you please explain to our beloved viewers how they can follow the Rumble Room, like the Rumble Room, and become friends of Victoria Rumble Room?
Well, Robin, whatever we're saying in this little bit at the end is working, because our viewership's exploding, our members are exploding. So
I hope our members aren't exploding too much.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe on some of the comments I'm
trying to be kind to our viewers.
That's right. So do not explode, but consider subscribing on so many of our popular platforms, that being Facebook and Twitter. If you join our Twitter account, there's like a lot of dialogue there. Twitter dialogue, vicious, hurtful, quick. You want to play in the sandbox, go to our Twitter account.
You shouldn't let your family on it.
Exactly, that's right. We also have a YouTube page, and all of our interviews are there, close to 200. So take a peek there. We also have a Facebook news and views site, which has been created by us to allow our, not members, our viewers to display, present their opinion and their events. We have an Instagram page and a TikTok page. TikTok's not too dissimilar from our Twitter activity, very lively. And for now, after what I think is just a fabulous show, thank you, Robin, and thank you, everyone who watches us. I'm Johnny Jurisic, the Croatian answer and brand to the world's most interesting man.
And that's why I find you so fascinating week after week, John. I want to thank the over 500,000 viewers that have been tuning into the Rumble Room over just a little bit over a year. I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.